In the book of Being, Martine Cannon tells the story of coming to meet Steve for the very first time. And she ended up coming to the funeral of my father and mother. Here's a picture of my mom and dad and me. They were amazing human beings. We called their funeral the Sweetheart Funeral because my parents passed just 6 days apart, and there were 2 caskets. Some people thought they were just coming to my mom's funeral, if you can imagine walking in and seeing 2 caskets. So it was a little bit of a shock for some people. But I have no doubt that my dad waited for my mom before he passed. For the previous 6 months, we thought that my dad would pass first. But I know that he stayed because he felt like he had to help my mom. Now you have to know they are both in hospital beds, laying next to each other, holding hands. It's not like my dad could really do a whole lot for my mother at that stage, but he was her knight in shining armor. And the reason he had to wait for her is because for the previous 10 years, my mom had had a long, slow decline to dementia. And if you've not walked through this with someone you love, this is not pretty. There is so much that is hard about it. It's hard to see people who were previously intelligent, vibrant, active, become just a shell of themselves. It's hard to take away their car keys. Not because it's car keys, but because it's their independence. It's hard to talk to someone who can't remember what they did the night before. You can't say, well, Dad, did you guys watch a movie last night? What did you do this morning? It's gone. We got to the point where I would come in and I'd give them a running monologue of my life and my family, and because there was no ability to interact. So they enjoyed that. We would sing songs. I printed out the lyrics of all the show tunes that they loved from the 1940s and the songs that they loved, and would go and would sit and I would sing songs with them. I would go into my grandkid closet and get the games I played with my 3-year-old granddaughter and take them to my parents' house and play them with them. And there was one particular game, we called it the cupcake game. I think maybe in England you'd call it the fairy cakes. Is that right? Steve had to tell me you may not use the word cupcakes. But it's one of those games, if you play with kids, there's a spinner, and like each little slot has a different ingredient. So you'd need to get the wet ingredients or the dry ingredients or the flavoring, and you spin it, and your intention's to get all of these. And we were sitting there playing, and after about 10 or 15 minutes, my mom said, Amy, you didn't tell me this was going to be so hard. So about 9 months before my mom passed, I had taken her to a neurologist. And the neurologist said he was going to ask her some questions. First, he asked her what month it was. She said, the hot one. We live in Arizona. That's 12 of the months. Okay, so that was a good bet. He asked her where she lived. She said Phoenix. She lived in Gilbert, which is a suburb of Phoenix. She had lived in Phoenix, but we hadn't lived there since 1971. He asked her what county Phoenix was in, and her eyes lit up, and she said, Maricopa. And so these questions continued. And the doctor left the room for a minute, and my mom looked at me, and she had such deep sadness in her eyes. And she said, I didn't do very well, did I? And the doctor came into the room, and he handed her a pencil and a paper, and he asked her to write down a sentence. She wrote, I have a wonderful life. At this point in her life, she had no memory. She had very little of her mental powers left. She really had very little of her physical powers. This was a woman until into her 80s was climbing the most difficult mountain, climbing Camelback Mountain once a week, but not at this point. But who she was left with, at her core, was her being. And at her being, she was gratitude, she was optimism, and she was that she had a wonderful life. See, being is everything. And being is the key to having a wonderful life.